Just going to check on the Facebook group. See what's happening here. I'm just seeing if this is being shared on Facebook as we speak.
It has been.
Oh, yep, cool. Awesome. Yep, I can see it. Fantastic. Okay, all right, everybody. So a couple of days ago, I did a live feed here on the NZHSP group page. The reason for the presentation really was just to let you guys know where my thoughts were around what we can do with this group. We've almost got 1,000 members on the Facebook group alone, predominantly within the health and safety professional world. And so some of the feedback that came back was that it would be great to speak to some subject matter experts out in the field who are responding to the current circumstances. Many of us today will be sat at home in the drizzling rain, wondering what we're going to be doing over the next few days, if not the next few weeks and months ahead, whilst others of us will be completely flat out trying to resolve and provide answers to business leaders who are desperately trying to figure out what they're responsible for and whether they fit into the criteria of critical services or not. So what we've done today is I've caught up with DeAnne Brabant earlier on today on the phone to pick her brains about some of these matters, and it came to both of us near the end of the conversation that would actually be really great and really valuable to take this live and to have this discussion today on this drizzly Sunday afternoon. So for those who don't know, DeAnne Brabant is the senior associate at Morrison Kent, based in Wellington. It's one of the foremost legal advisory groups here in New Zealand. We're very fortunate to have them. Very fortunate to have met DeAnne a few months ago, and during our discussions today, we come up with some really interesting insights into where we're at. So, DeAnne, welcome.
Hi everyone. I just also wanted to say I used to be a prosecutor at WorkSafe New Zealand, previous life, and I'm an associate teaching fellow at Massey University in occupational health and safety as well. So at the moment, the environment is sort of a bit scary and a bit hard for people to navigate, I guess, particularly around the essential services parts of the government's initiative during the Alert 4 and the lockdown, and whether or not, one, you're an essential business and you should be running, and therefore how do you do so? But also, what if you're a plumber or an electrician or someone like that that's actually required by an essential service to actually provide services to them? So in the last week, I've been navigating this minefield for plumbers and electricians, and with some very large contracts that are actually wanting to continue on, have business continuity, provide services to those essential services, but also make sure that their people are safe while doing so.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and the types of contracts we're talking about are the service and trades contractors, those that are out there providing electrical or plumbing maintenance to district health boards, hospitals predominantly, and no doubt would be potentially being exposed to some pretty high risk environments. So yeah,
and that also includes primary producers, so food producers, wineries, beverage producers, because they've still been considered to be essential. Some people had existing contracts with those people for building part of their actual infrastructure to keep them working, and some of them are doing maintenance work on those essential services in order to keep them going. But then there's also the other category for building services and essential services, which is the health and safety aspect as well. So to human life rather than property, but protecting human life. So there are circumstances, for example, where earthworks have been undertaken at a building site that until such time as they're shored up, there's actually a risk to human life. And MB considers that to be an essential building service that needs to be done. So then the question is, how does that get done appropriately in the circumstances that we have now?
Yeah. Yeah, so one thing that struck me over the last few days in particular is around the continuity management planning. I don't get a sense that it's particularly a strength within the majority of the business world within New Zealand.
No.
I even did a Google search a couple of days ago just to see what service providers were out there to actually provide that assistance. There's not a great deal of them out there. So in terms of your own response, DeAnne, what's been keeping you busy?
What's been keeping me busy? I've been extremely busy, but one of the things that I've been trying to do, and with my health and safety background, and also I'm a civil litigator, so I do a lot of work to either cancel contracts or ensure that they keep on working or moving, has been navigating for the likes of electrical contractors and various people like that with very large contracts about how they can work through the process of the Alert 4 while still actually providing the services to the people that they've actually got contractual agreements with. Now, you can imagine that's a little bit of a minefield because they've actually got contractual obligations and they are essentially being told that you'll be in breach of your contract if you don't actually perform these services, despite the fact that there's a lockdown. So some of the things that we've had to look at are, is it actually an essential service? Is the part that they want the contractor to do essential to their essential service? Or does it fall within that category of health and safety? Is it appropriate that they're even working at the moment? And that has some other implications too, because if they have work that they can be and should be doing, then they're not entitled to things like the subsidies that are available. Because actually the subsidies are really for employers and PCBUs who don't actually have work and have had 30% turn down in their work and can prove that compared to the same time last year. While it's been done on a good faith basis at the moment, granting those things, there's also a declaration that you make that you say, this is true, and if my circumstances change, then I will actually have to let you know that, and more than likely they'll have to pay money back. So right now, because of the crisis, they're granting money on a very quick basis. I understand it's sometimes the same day, if not the day after, to the employer, but that there's a lot of trust put with the employer about that application that they're making. That becomes a bit of a problem for people who have ongoing contracts to essential providers. So you would have seen maybe in the newspaper that New World haven't been, for example, allowed to get the subsidies because they're considered an essential service that should still be working. That therefore then creates some employment issues for people, because some people don't want to be put in the situation where they might be exposed to COVID, but they're not a person that could actually say, I'm a vulnerable person, or I'm a person that shouldn't be out in the community. And that becomes an employment issue. So there's actually a lot of a big legal minefield going on here that we've been trying to navigate people through in the circumstances.
Yeah. So in terms of perhaps a high level summary of the success you've had with the plumbing world, it sounds like you've managed to navigate a workaround that allows all parties to be able to get on with what it is they need to do, whilst making rights and obligations as clear as possible.
Yeah, so for essential services, people that are part of the supply chain, we've been, I've been drafting what is a supplementary part to their contract that they currently have with those providers, by which we actually record first off the section 34 duty, the consultation and putting down what controls need to be in place. They've been based on Ministry of Health, MB, and all of the other government suggestions in terms of distancing, sanitation, use of PPE, bubbling, having the shifts separated off and keeping the people in the same shift with the groups of people so that you're actually not cross-contaminating across shifts, qualifying people in terms of whether or not they should be in the worksite. We've been putting into those contracts that no one over 70 should be at the worksite. And these are the terms that we're saying, we'll supply our services to you, but you actually have to ensure that these things are in place in order for us to supply the services. So we're not in breach of our contract. What we're saying is we will continue to supply services to you, but you must do these things. And in some instances, if there's a consideration that there might be a question around whether or not these are essential services, then we're putting a little bit more bolstering in for people too around indemnities, etc., in terms of if they were to get a fine or it were to be considered that it wasn't an essential service and they were found to be working there, then what happens with that as well. So the main thing is, these duties are normally ones that we do. We sit down with a PCBU, don't we? And we talk about what controls need to be in place and who's got the better controls and what we adopt. And there's a level of trust there. But in a circumstance like a crisis like this, my view is that actually having those contracts where it's very clear to everybody what the rules are incredibly important. So we're not working in the normal environment. We're actually having to record down what we've agreed with one another, and we have to also record things like I've put into those agreements, that if a worker, and it's the duty that's in the Health and Safety and Work Act anyway, that if a worker were to find that the controls weren't being followed, that they would raise them with the PCBU who's responsible for the site, and if they're not remedied or can't be remedied quickly, that they have the right to walk off that site. Now, that's a statutory right, but we're putting it into the contract and we're making it clear because we want workers to also be able to see these contracts and see what's in place and see that the PCBU that's employing them or the subcontractors to that PCBU know that the PCBU is actually wanting to address those things and that they need to be dealt with and that they're now embedded as an agreement.
Do you think it's because the Health and Safety at Work Act is still arguably relatively new, or is it that there's not a strong culture when it comes to knowing roles, responsibilities, your rights at work, the duty holders within the workplace in New Zealand? What's your take on it?
I think that is an issue in general, but I think when we're in an environment like we are right now, where actually it's a new normal, right? It's not actually normal at all. And risk management and all of those normal things that we do. And if you had competing duties with other legislation and that, then we would say you need to comply with both. Some of those things now are actually pushed aside. For example, the requirement to meet what they're saying in terms of the Ministry of Health and the Health Act, and that actually overrides some things at the moment, if you think about it. So I think someone had asked questions earlier, Matt, about, ergonomics at home and all of those things, because now we're working from home offices. Some of those things we're going to have to accept that we might not have the right working environment that we need to have at this moment in time. And that's not okay in terms of health and safety, but we also have a limited period of time that we're working with a chair that's not appropriate, or in circumstances where our computer's not set up how we should have it set up and those sort of things. And we're doing it out of necessity. And our employers, in order to keep us working, have allowed us to work from home and had to do so at very short notice. If you think about it, Saturday was the first announcement in terms of going to level 2, but by Wednesday we were at level 4, and no one necessarily had the business continuity planning to the extent that they probably needed to do. So our home offices are probably not very good. I think, Matt, you're sitting on a chest of drawers at times, you said.
That's right. Yeah, I'm actually. Yeah, literally. Yeah.
Yeah,
so
and
sleeping baby next to me.
So the other thing I would say too, someone said, "Oh, what if you spill a cup of coffee while you're actually working?" And that, in the current environment, we just have to be actually incredibly careful in general. If you think about it, you've heard on the news about not going surfing and that sort of thing, because actually emergency services need to be reserved for people who are really unwell and suffering from COVID. And so we shouldn't really be putting ourselves in a situation where we're likely to get harmed anyway, like break our leg or climb up a ladder or do some dumb things or decide that we're going to paint our roof and that sort of thing while we're off on this, because those services actually need to be used for the right things.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, there's people with cancer surgery and that, if let's put it in perspective, that have had their cancer surgery put off.
Yes. Yeah.
In order for there to be enough doctors and resources, etc., available for what they think is going to be an onslaught hitting the hospitals.
Yeah.
So you really don't want to be someone that needs to go into A&E or that sort of thing at the moment, and you don't want to be someone that's actually going to put a drain on health resources and healthcare that doesn't need to at the moment.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I mean, it really does boil down to good old risk assessment, really, doesn't it? In terms of what really ought to be our priorities in managing this unusual situation that we find ourselves in, prioritizing our responses as professionals, and also reminding ourselves and our bubbles that we are ultimately responsible for our own health and well-being wherever we find ourselves working. And we need to be mindful of that and be sure that we're actually doing what we can in our own environments too. Before I've got a couple of more questions that I'd love to ask, but before I continue, those that are tuning in live currently at the moment, we can see your comments. So I can see that you guys are saying hello and hi's, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's nice.
Yeah, we'd love to have some of your questions and perhaps some of your feedback, maybe some of the points that we've raised that you hadn't considered before, or maybe gets you thinking about something that you've seen. Feel free to stick that in the comments box. We can't directly reply to them typey, but we can certainly speak to them. So please, by all means, feel free to fire through questions and thoughts. Now, we talked earlier on today before we went live on the phone, and we were talking about the types of PPE considerations, the types of control measures that contractors, essential service contractors, should consider if and when they are requested to visit perhaps someone's home that they've rung up to say, hey, look, we've got a serious event happened at home, it needs to be resolved. What types of controls and considerations should they take into account? Are you able to share some of?
Yeah, I can, and I can talk a bit, and I'm interested in people's feedback too on the types of things that we've been sort of looking through in terms of occupational hygiene and also just some practical ways to deal with things. You take your example, say, of an electrician that's going to somebody's house and it is a health and safety issue. There's a likelihood of a fire, for example. They're going to be going there. So what they're going to have to do is pre-qualify before they go to the home several things. First off, work out if it is an essential service and if it's a health and safety matter, and it's that there's imminent harm or risk to life. And then what they have to do about that then also is pre-qualify that household in terms of trying to find out whether or not there's anyone there with COVID, whether there's anyone that's actually in self-isolation, or and in general. So those are the things that they'll want to know before they go there. Some of the things that we've thought through with talking with occupational hygienists and some other people about this is also that there's some really neat things that you could do that actually will help you and assist you. Like, for example, before you go to the house, and we'll get to about PPE shortly, but before you get to the house, they could actually FaceTime you through the house in terms of where the actual thing is and show you where to go. You have every right to say to the people within that house, regardless of whether they've had COVID or not, we want you to actually stay in a room that's about 2 meters distance, at least from the hallway, at least from the front door. We want you to have cleaned down the area appropriately before we actually come there. And we need you to ensure that you lock all animals away and you keep yourselves away from us while we do the work. And that and that's how you'd manage the distancing part of it. And I think and to leave the front door open or unlocked at least, so that they don't have to actually meet you at the front door and those sort of things. I mean, that's not unreasonable in the circumstances. It might feel very weird to people in terms of having to ask people to do that, but you also have to take into account that not everyone's honest with you, not everyone does all the right things, not everyone's kept their hygiene up, and not everybody's actually stayed within their bubble. So
that's right.
And then in terms of PPE, well, there's some guidance actually came out on Friday from the Ministry of Health, which was we'd been waiting for all week long. There's some really good posters about when you'll need certain types of PPE. But what I can say is that in none of them, and that includes for care workers, is there the need for an N95 or a P2 mask or respirator. And that's probably a good thing at the moment, because I don't think you'd get any occupational health nurses out to actually fit people appropriately at the moment. And you get into lots of, I think we're talking about, you get into lots of issues about making employees shave beards off and all sorts of things for a good seal. But that's not required at all. And if you're actually distancing appropriately, then they say you don't really need a mask. But if you are in close proximity, then you should have a mask and eye protection, etc. In all cases, they say wear gloves. And make sure you do appropriate hand hygiene. And they do recommend in all cases that you wear a fluid resistant gown as well if you are going. So I would say that's for healthcare workers. But I would say that that's appropriate if you know you're going into a household with that there's actually COVID. That you just treat it like you're actually I think, take out of the abundance of caution, take the consideration into account and use the poster for healthcare workers as your guide in terms of that. But there is another guide also for essential workers. And for the most part, the major thing is distancing, hand washing, gloves, and keeping your hands away from things. Making sure that in the environment that you're going to, the door handles and all of those things have been cleaned appropriately. But what I'm saying to the people that are going into people's houses is do a good clean when you get in there as well. So tell them that they have to clean, but then do a secondary clean as appropriate.
So assume they haven't done it, basically.
And in terms of my discussions with the occupational hygienist, spray and wipe and stuff like that is okay, but you need to let it rest for 20 seconds on the surfaces before you wipe it down. So if you wipe it too quickly, then it wouldn't have had a chance to actually really get in there and kill off bugs. So I think, like, if you're getting them to do their clean first and they tell you that they've done it, and then you do your clean, then that should be particularly clear. The likes of plumbers and that are going near toilets and those sort of things, where we're starting to learn a bit more about COVID. We're starting to realise that it's found in sewage. That and the Dutch experience so far, that they have actually found the virus living in sewage. And they think that's come from the feces of people that have actually had COVID. So there is a risk for plumbers, etc. They just need to manage the risk appropriately in the circumstances. Can they say no to the work? Well, some of them, I think the answer is they probably can't, because if too many of them start saying no to the work, then we've got a real problem in terms of public hygiene. Particularly plumbers. If the sewage is bursting and those sort of things and they need to work on it, then there's going to be a real problem. If they say no to hospitals and that sort of thing, well, they need them, don't they, to keep running. And so if that sort of thing happens, then I think they just have to be prepared to do the work, but they have to also make sure that the other side has got the right controls in place. In a hospital, you're not going to be so bad off, but going into someone's house, you need to be very careful about that. And I think you assume that they haven't done the right things in the first place, hence the secondary cleaning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so basically it's just running the assumption that they haven't taken the controls that you'd asked for. It's probably the same with like they've indicated that they've got a dog on site, but yeah, don't just simply assume that they've locked it away and tread with caution. I imagine.
Yeah, I mean that's right. And also look, it's great with FaceTime and those sort of things, or using Messenger, any one of those any of those things that people have got access to, in terms of one, identifying yourself so that they know who you are coming into their house, but also two, that you get navigated around their house without actually having to have that contact with them. Because I think you want to be able to say to your employees, this is the things that we have in place for the workers. This is what we're doing to protect you in a time that we're asking you to work in circumstances that everybody else is locked down and they're not wanting to work. And I understand that you may not want to work, but the point is that we are an essential service. And so this is what we all put in place to actually make you safe. But I think they need to be reminded too that if they don't feel safe, and it's for good reason, that those things in the Health and Safety Work Act apply in terms about saying no to work. And if they go into a particular house and they think this house is an absolute, it's a pigsty, it's unclean, I don't feel safe, then they should have every right to walk out of there, and some other thing, decisions being made about how that house is going to be attended to or dealt with.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, for those who have just joined us, we are running a very special live interview here. So it's me, Matt Jones from NZHSP, and we're joined today with DeAnne Brabant. So DeAnne is a senior associate at Morrison Kent. She's based in Wellington. She's the health and safety expert as part of the team. And prior to her role at Morrison Kent, she was also a senior lead prosecutor for WorkSafe NZ for some time, and has an incredible breadth of experience when it comes to interpreting the Health and Safety at Work Act law, the regulations, and also the way in which we can put it into practice in the workplace. Now, obviously, we find ourselves in very unusual circumstances currently, so we're using this as an opportunity to explore how some of DeAnne's experiences are allowing her to provide answers and solutions to her clients. So those that are tuned in and listening at the moment, we can see your comments, we can see your questions coming through. Awesome. Please keep them coming. Unfortunately, we can't actually see who is posting. We can just simply see what's being written. So
I can actually see, Matt.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, because I'm actually sitting in with you guys in the room at the same time as talking to you. So you've got one from Rahul. How do you see the future of health and safety professionals after the pandemic? Already, Matt, I think both of us can probably say this, and is that I've seen clients now turning their focus more to health and safety. And probably I think there'll be a real change for us that, an area that people actually hadn't been that focused on was occupational health. And they were just not really aware of it. They were more about avoiding incidents and fatalities, and not thinking about long-term effects of things like asbestos and on actual health. There's stuff around zoonotic diseases, etc., and influenza. They've actually been always within the health and safety realm. And they've always been part of your obligation as an employer to ensure that, it doesn't rip through your influenza in general, just normal influenza, doesn't rip through your working environment and significantly impact on people in the workplace. This is also probably changing some people's ideas around risk, because now we've got to think of a life-threatening risk that we know is actually life-threatening. And we have to sort of change people's mindsets about not being about themselves anymore, or about their own bubble that they've been living in and the way that they've been living. And now actually think about managing risk not only for themselves personally, but for everybody else around them. Oops, there we go. Did
yeah, sorry,
the sound went for a minute there?
Yeah, I just had to click my microphone. I've got the baby in the background. Yeah, no, I'm grab the baby. 2 seconds. I'll be right back.
I'll just entertain you on my own for a bit.
Yeah, you just carry on there, yeah. No,
Well, I was going to say too that I do think that our work will increase, but it'll be different work.
Yeah.
Hi, baby. That's very cute. It may be actually quite different work, and if you're not really up to skill with health, occupational health, that it would be really, really good to probably skew yourself up in that area, because I think that that's where we're going.
Yeah.
People are going to want to know, and let's face it too, like what we've learned from the Spanish flu and other epidemics is that they come in waves. So this may actually be just our first wave.
Yeah.
And we have to all be prepared also for the fact that, and I'm not being all doom and gloom, but that we're on alert for it at the moment, and initially it's for 4 weeks. But that's dependent on how well their virus responds to this lockdown period, and how well people behave during that too, to be fair, because some are not, some are being pretty naughty.
Yeah.
And people have to actually take it seriously, because it's about the virus not having a place to attach to. So if there's humans out and about in the community, then there's still something for the virus to jump onto. But if we actually stay in our houses and we only come out when we need to, and we're limited exposure to the virus, it's got nowhere to go. Now, we have a good opportunity, according to the Otago Medical School, to actually eliminate in New Zealand the virus, but we have to behave.
Yes.
That's not to say that we don't get a second wave here. It also is not to say that we won't go from alert 4 down to alert 3, and then a 2, and then a 1. And so we're probably looking at managing this for the rest of the year, if you're really honest with yourselves, and maybe into next year as well. The other thing for us as health and safety professionals is that we're going to have to be aware that businesses are still going to need to actually deal with the health and safety, but financially they're going to be pretty tight. And their priorities will be on business as usual, and somehow we're going to have to help them to navigate through a time where we are going to go into a recession. As soon as we shut our borders, we knew that there would be a recession in this country. So let's be real, that decisions were made in order to protect us all, and they weren't made lightly. But there are still going to be things that we're going to have to be tackling and dealing with, and working out ways to do it efficiently for people with very little cost.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. I think the health and safety world is going to have to become very nimble and very streamlined. I think we're going to have to choose, even down to our language and the way in which we present what it is we're trying to get over the line in much smarter ways. It goes back to, I mean, I always bang on about how health and safety needs to evolve and move beyond the paper-based manuals and the documents that sit on the shelves in offices. We're going to have to get far more agile in the way in which we get the message across. Using things like this as a great example of how we're talking to live. We've probably already addressed maybe 20 or 30 odd people. This will no doubt go much further than that. It's just, we're going to have to evolve and change the way in which we're doing what it is we do.
I also think that this has probably brought to the fore something that needed to happen, which is that we need to actually think with kindness towards one another. And also, in terms of our business environment, think about who we work with, because some of our workmates, for example, go home to an empty house each night. Well, right now they're actually working in lockdown from a house by themselves, where they have no delineation between work and home.
Yep. Yeah.
The rest of us who have partners and children and pets and other things going on have some distraction away from the work environment, but they're actually in a work environment 24/7, if you think about it.
Yes.
And those people, things like Teams and chat groups and making sure you connect with one another at the moment are a really, really important part of health and safety in the workplace as well, in terms of mental health and in terms of ensuring that people feel they're still part of the organisation and are not disposable. Because the other thing that you can think of is, if they can function without me during this time, am I actually needed on the other side? And so workplaces are going to have to think about too, how do we actually stop that hysteria and some of the things that are being said. I mean, look, there's some very odd stuff going on the internet at the moment. I don't think you want to probably look at it too much, but, you know, people, I think as health and safety professionals, we have an opportunity to understand things with a bit more logic around it. But, you know, the other day I saw someone post something up about showing planes flying still into New Zealand and try to make some sort of hysteria around that. And it took a number of people to say to them, they're medical supplies and people trying to get home. And so, yes, and our borders are being locked down from the 2nd of April. So there is a number of people that are trying their best to get back home at the moment. But if we start sort of creating those sort of narratives and stories around things, that becomes a real problem, because people start getting sort of uptight and stressed about stuff and making trouble for themselves that they don't need to make. And I suppose one of the things that we can do as health and safety professionals is actually bring a bit more objectivity there and a bit more logic around what's going on and why it needs to happen, and come back to the facts rather than the hysteria. Tamper down some of the stuff that's in the media or things that have been reported about, the likes of not being enough PPE and all of those things, because we produce PPE in New Zealand, and they're an essential service, so they will keep doing it. So that's what we're needing to be mindful of, is that the government and everyone else is doing, and us are doing our best to keep people running and keep people safe. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah, definitely. Now, I know, and this is a great question that's come through, is that you're clearly abreast of the latest information that's coming out from reputable sources. So clearly things like the Ministry of Health, WorkSafe NZ, in terms of what PPE, what cleaning products, what levels of controls are most appropriate. Are there good sources of information or key articles that we should all be aware of?
That Covid19 site that's set up by the Ministry of Health is very good. You do, at the moment, there is a bit of sort of moving between various sites. Like if you want to work out whether or not you're an essential service, then that's on the MB site. There's also sort of some confusion around MPI have put a registration system in, for example, for people that consider themselves to be essential services. Some people have thought that that's a registration service in terms of, say, getting a decision around whether or not you're an essential service. That's not correct. What it is that MPI is considered to be an essential service, and MPI are asking people to register if they are still running as an essential service, so that they know what controls are in place at that business if they were to send one of their workers there who's actually required to make sure that food safety practices are being followed appropriately, and so that they can plan ahead. However, MBI, they aren't, IE aren't actually doing approvals, but what they will do is, if you think you're borderline or you're not sure about whether you should be operating or how to operate, etc., they do have an email address, essential@mbie.govt.nz, and they will then answer your questions. If it's an urgent matter, like I had one which was about earthworks, etc., they will answer it very quickly, and they will come back to you very quickly. If it's a matter of health and safety and life, then they'll do that on an urgent basis. Otherwise, you do get an answer relatively quickly in any case about those things. So Yeah, it's just a matter of making sure that you're going to reputable sites. World Health Organization is great. Ministry of Health, they've got now the controls, they've got the cleaning measures that you need. I think someone's got a question about cleaning products to use, etc. I mean, that's covered off on the Ministry of Health site. There's various things that you can do in terms of the cleaning products, but you don't need to. Industrial is not necessarily the best either, or better. But Ministry of Health has all that guidance there about what to do, how to clean, how to do it, to moving from the door outwards and all of those other things, and do it. So going to the wall, coming back out to the door, all of those things, they tell you that stuff. So there's very little left for guessing, and in terms of guidance, it's probably much better than what it was prior to the situation. But people are adjusting and they're slowly getting guidance up. So I understand from WorkSafe that they will be having guidance around PPE coming out directly from WorkSafe as well.
Awesome.
And they're probably giving some guidance around cleaning products and that sort of thing, and sterilization as well. But yeah, you've got to understand too that everybody was caught a little bit off guard.
Yes, yeah.
We didn't quite see it hitting us this badly, this quickly.
No, it was a bit of a shock, all right. I think it's probably the same for everyone across the country. Just sat in the office watching the live feed, and it was like, oh, this is going to a 4, crikey. Yeah, it happened very quick. And I guess further to what you're saying is, and it's a habit that I've got into now, and I know I'm driving my partner mad, is whenever she's telling me the latest news or the latest way in which to respond when she's going through her news feeds, is I'm always turning to her and going, okay, cool, but what was the source? And she's like, stop questioning the source, I'm not that silly. But I think it's so important for us to remind ourselves to do that, is to look to make sure that it is from a legitimate space and not just some hearsay.
I think also look, Ashley Bloomfield and people like that have been doing an amazing job at actually dispelling some of the hysteria maybe around like the likes of PPE and that sort of thing. When they're asked about PPE stocks, etc., they've been saying, no, we produce it here, we've still got enough, we've got lots of stocks available, the people that need it are going to get it. Now on that point, just before I forget too, just talking about PPE, if your clients are going into essential services, i.e. rest homes and Ministry of Health entities, then what you do is you register yourself with the Ministry of Health in terms of needing PPE, and say which employees need it and where they're going and what they're doing, and they actually have got a ability to provide you with PPE. So you just need to go on the website, on the Ministry of Health site, and they will. It tells you about that. If you do a search on PPE, then they'll that has it there.
Cool. And so that's for any essential services that are registered with the Ministry of Health, is that right, or the DHB?
No. So the essential services that are providing services to the DHBs or to rest homes, or so you might have existing contracts. But if you're a plumber or an electrician and you think you might be likely to be called by them, or that sort of thing, then I think that you'd probably be better to let Ministry of Health know that you are available for providing services during the period, and that you do need PPE for your staff if they do were to attend, for your workers.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Cool. Well, look, we've got a few more minutes for some more questions. So if those that are listening live, feel free to stick your questions through. We've got one around getting into the health and safety profession. We've actually got a ready-made answer for that. Is that on the that way on the left-hand side of your screen? There's something called units. It's in the contents column on the left-hand side of the screen, and behind units you'll find a collection of conversations that have already happened on the NZHSP group page, and there's a lot of conversations around how to get into health and safety, what qualifications, what courses, who's the best from people's opinions. It's all there ready for you. So if you jump into the unit section, you'll find that answer to that question. But you've definitely.
And I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan, having come from WorkSafe too, of people actually. Another route is actually going in as applying to be an inspector. If you have a sort of an enforcement background, like they've hired people that are ex-police officers, ex-customs, from other government agencies and that sort of thing, and to be inspectors, there's a great training program there, and the opportunity to also study and do some of those courses that Matt's talking about. I won't push my messy one because that's a bit naughty, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed the messy one too, actually. Just quite. Cool, awesome. Gosh, I mean, there's so much ground to cover. We've covered a heap of ground as it is, but I mean, it really is a moving feast. I think possibly from my point of view.
Sorry, someone's got a question here, Matt. Sorry about that.
Yeah. No, go for it. So what have we got? So what about PPE for people providing
sorry,
support?
you may have missed the talk at the beginning, Jenny. So on the Ministry of Health website is also a series of guidance, and there's actually some brilliant posters that are just straight to the point, really easy to understand. So they're split in two. One of them is for PPE for essential health workers and people that are actually in the doing health work, and then there's for essential services that are non-healthcare. So it gives you guidance about what PPE you should be wearing. And what I was saying is, if people are going into actual houses where they're not aware of what the circumstances are, they're better to follow, I think, the PPE guidelines for healthcare workers as opposed to just the standard ones, say, out on a construction site and that sort of thing.
Yeah, cool. Sorry, I think we just lost your camera feed there just for a minute there at the end, but it's all good. We can still hear you, which is the main thing.
Oh, nice.
So I'll just
I hope, Jenny, did that answer?
Oh, there you go. Try that. Hopefully that'll bring you back. It sounded good to me. Yeah, and then so is anyone else out there that's got any super amazing, super hot questions that they'd like to ask, or feel free to ask any questions that have sprung to mind or you've thought about during this interview. For those of us that have just joined this broadcast, so what we've done over the last 47 minutes or so is we've been listening to DeAnne Brabant, who is a she's a senior associate. Sorry, I don't know why that keeps falling out of my head. So she's a senior associate at Morrison and Kent. Morrison Kent, well, the HQ is in Wellington. That's where DeAnne is based. But they have a massive national presence. And I've been fortunate enough to know DeAnne now for a few months, and been able to follow her story and really get to understand some of the things that she gets to deal with in her day-to-day. And she's been kept incredibly busy with the response, just like most of us have, with going to level 4 within the last 4 days now. So in terms of final questions, final thoughts, whilst we wait for any further comments, DeAnne, is there anything else you'd like to touch on before we begin to wrap up?
I think, as health and safety professionals, and then everybody else who's in business too, actually don't be afraid to be honest about what you're struggling with or don't know, or what's not within your wheelhouse. Like right now, a lot of us don't know what we're doing. We're waiting for guidance to come out from the Ministry of Health. We're waiting for people to tell us stuff. I'm spending my days working, helping, assisting people, but I'm also having to tune in at 1 o'clock every day to see what's being said on the press releases as well, because actually the world's changing from day to day. So your normal rules around risk assessment, trying to manage risk, trying to deal with things, they're not quite what you thought they were. And what you think might be common sense is maybe not so common. We're seeing that, aren't we? Like this is health and safety is definitely not common sense, but in the best of times. But right now, we have to sort of put some trust in our health, healthcare providers and the people that are providing advice about what's happening in New Zealand in terms of the spread of the virus. Sadly, today I see that we've actually had our first death. And that's going to cause some fear for people and make them, quite fearful because they probably thought we were a little bit untouchable. And that may not be our first one, sadly, that we see. And so what we have to be aware of too is that people will be responding out of their own emotional response to the situation. Our role is to actually help them navigate and to bring some logic in and to bring the truth as much as we know it, and to actually ensure that they are, that the rules have changed slightly, but our parameters that we work within are still the same. Like we're still responsible for ensuring that people do the right thing, that they have the right controls in place. And so if we don't know what those are, then we go and find them, or we find somebody that does know what they are and we get them to talk to our people about it, because it's not a guessing game anymore, and we shouldn't be doing that. What we should be doing is making sure that we have the right information before we give it out to people.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, gosh, I mean, it really is just changing times, but I think one of the silver linings is that we have the ability to tap into our existing resources, our networks, our communities. I've seen a lot of examples of intellectual property that's suddenly become freely available and is being shared across various platforms, just to ensure that we're all providing a consistent message, and we also have the tools and resources we need to provide the answers to those that we answer to. So I mean, there's definitely a lot of silver linings to what's going on at the moment, and I think more and more of that will become clear as time goes on. But yeah, I mean, we're still very much in the trenches, and we're going to be here for quite some time, I suspect.
And I know you all got your own businesses in that, but quite frankly, actually we're all in this together. We actually need to be being kind to one another, talk to each other on the forums. Don't be afraid to ask a question of other health and safety professionals if you just don't know the answer. Their experiences and the things that they've dealt with might make them more equipped to answer that question, and it's no slight on you in terms of your knowledge base that you don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, look, I think that's probably a really good spot to wrap up this session. So, I mean, gosh, thank you so much for your time, DeAnne. Like
you're welcome.
The information has been really so timely and very, very deep in content and direction as well. I'm sure there's a lot of people that have been doing lots of Google searches since we began this. So look, I'll let you get back to it, but I suspect this may be the first of many interviews over the next few weeks and months ahead. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And we'll speak again.
Okay, thank you. Be well, everybody. Stay home.
Actually, before you go, DeAnne, in terms of people wanting to reach out and get in touch with you directly, is there a best way for them to do that?
On the Morrison Kent website, you'll see my lovely picture. I look much better than what I do on a Sunday afternoon. And if you click on that and you head down to the bottom, there's my cell phone number. That's the best number at the moment, and then also my email address at Morrison Kent. So that's DeAnne.br, so DeAnne.Brabant at morrisonkent.com.
Fantastic. Awesome. Okay, thank you very much, and
You're
we'll
welcome.
speak again soon.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.